Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. Let's wait for a minute because there were more registrants. We'll give them some more time to join. All right. So thank you for joining. And before I dive into today's topic, I want to share a quick insight that will help set the stage for this conversation. According to 2025 Web AIM Million Accessibility Report, it's mouthful, an annual study that evaluates about 1 million homepages. Nearly 95% of those pages failed accessibility checks. And one of the most common issues found, missing form input labels, which means the web page failed when it had a data capture element embedded in it. That single finding says a lot about how data capture or forms are treated today. They are often the neglected child of technology and something organization avoid touching because it simply works. And as long as it works, the thinking goes, there's no urgency to fix the experience, right? But I'm here today to challenge that thinking. Forms are not just functional components. They are face of your organization. In many cases, they matter just as much or more than your homepage. They're where your users apply, register, request, submit, and depend on you. So, with that perspective, let's get started. I'm Aisha Vyas, and today we are going to explore how organizations can move from inaccessible forms to accessible, usable, and inclusive experiences. We'll look at what's broken, why it matters, and most importantly, how to fix it in a way that's realistic and achievable. Quick housekeeping note, this session is being recorded and will be shared after the webinar. So let's get started. Again, my name is Aisha Vyas, and I'm a strategic solution architect at 4Point. I have been with 4Point for about 5 years, working closely with organizations that rely on digital forms and complex workflows. My role focuses on driving innovation in how forms are designed, delivered, and experienced, particularly where AI can help reduce friction, improve accuracy, and support modernization. A core part of my work is also centered on accessibility, making sure that the way people interact with forms today, work across different abilities and devices. And besides that, I love reading mysteries, with Agatha Christie being one of my favorites. I find it fascinating how Poirot unravels complex situation and pieces everything together so that it all makes sense eventually. All right, and I'm really glad you're here today, and I'm looking forward to have this conversation with you. During this session, we'll walk through the accessibility requirements that different organizations are facing today, along with the key deadlines driving urgency. And we'll start by understanding the basics, what WCAG is, which is Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and why it matters. From there, we'll look at the most common accessibility issues in forms, focuses on problems that show up in real world implementations. And to make this concrete, we will walk through a few visual examples, what bad looks like and what good looks like when accessibility is done right. Next, We will go through a success story demonstrating practical, realistic progress in accessibility. And once we've covered the applicable form guidelines and how they work, we'll shift into what implementation looks like, how teams can move from requirements to action. And then I have another interesting bit towards the end where we'll explore how AI fits into the journey of accessibility, specifically through voice forms, and how it can help reduce barriers without disrupting your existing systems. And finally, we will leave time for QA at the end. I would also like to share that we are recognized by Adobe as trusted experts in form accessibility and compliance. So when we talk about the art of possible, we base our requirements on actual delivery, not just policy interpretation. Now, why are we suddenly talking about accessibility? To that, I want to say we are already late. But there are too many reasons why we need to give accessibility our focus. Globally, almost 16% of the population, which is about 1.3 billion, is living with disability. That number in US is approximately 70 million. And in Canada, disability affects almost a quarter of its population. And while there are clearly many people who could get benefit from an accessible form, yet 70% of the forms online are inaccessible. This juxtaposition shows that accessibility is still not treated as a basic design necessity. It is not an edge case, it is your users. And forms matter because forms are the front door to your services. And if the front door is jammed or hard to open, people don't get to the service on time. Also, a practical business reality. Inaccessible forms increase abandonment and support volume. And if you have ever watched someone rage click a submit button, congratulations, you've witnessed an accessibility issue and a customer experience problem at the same time. We've established that accessibility is no longer an edge case. Today, organizations must make their forms and online services accessible if they want to provide access for everyone. Forms are often the gateway to critical programs, services, and benefits. And for many users, this is the only way they interact with the organization. And accessibility isn't optional anymore, it's the law. It's a civil right requirement, backed by clear regulations, defined standards, and real deadlines, with enforcement behind them. This isn't about future planning, it's about what organizations are expected to deliver now. But beyond compliance, there's a very real user experience impact. Accessible forms are easier to understand, faster to complete, and far less likely to be abandoned. And when people can confidently complete a form without confusion, guesswork, frustration, everyone wins. And that leads directly to business benefits. Accessibility improvements don't just help users with disabilities, they improve accuracy, reduce errors, lower support costs, and increase completion rates for all users. When forms are accessible, they help organizations achieve their goal: efficiency, compliance, reliable data, while allowing users to achieve theirs, completing what they came to do with clarity and confidence. Now let's briefly talk about deadlines. The Department of Justice in US requires state and local government forms to meet WCAG 2 level AA standard. This rule was formally published in April 2024. From there, two compliance timelines apply. For agencies serving a population of 50,000 or more, the compliance deadline is in April this year. And for agencies serving a population under 50,000, the deadline is in April next year. So when you look at these timelines, the real question isn't whether accessibility needs to be addressed. It is how. And more specifically, what's the most realistic path to compliance that doesn't require a 2-year perfect world rebuild situation? On the federal side, Section 508 requires accessibility across digital experiences, including forms, websites, software, and hardware. And the minimum standard today is 2.0 level AA. Well, that is the formal requirement. The practical guidance we give is this, that if you're building or remediating now, aim for WCAG 2.1 or 2.2 where possible. Those versions better address modern realities like mobile usage and cognitive accessibility. Think of it like upgrading the locks on your front door. You can meet the minimum code, or you can meet the minimum code and reduce future compliance risk at the same time. Now, let's look at Canada. At the federal level, accessibility is governed by Accessible Canada Act, or ACA. The ACA sets the explanation that digital services, including forms, must be accessible, and it aligns with European Accessibility Standard, which is EN 301549, which aligns with WCAG level 2.1 level AA. And at the provincial level, requirements can vary. For example, in Ontario, accessibility is governed by the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, or AODA. Under AODA, both public and private sector organizations are required to meet WCAG 2.0 level AA for their digital content and services. The key takeaway is this: accessibility is no longer optional. Every organization is now expected to meet accessibility standards, whether through one framework or another. Now that we have talked and walked through the rules and regulations in US and Canada, the next question is how serious the situation is really. And more importantly, what actually happens when an organization fails to comply with accessibility requirements? According to the ADA Digital Accessibility Lawsuit Report, digital accessibility lawsuits continue to rise, with more than 5,000 cases filed across federal and state courts in 2025 alone. Now, pause for a moment and think about the real cost of a lawsuit beyond legal fees. It's the internal effort, diverted resources, and the time spent just trying to recover from it. This report also highlighted another interesting pattern that was seen far too often. Some organizations responded to lawsuits by applying quick fixes and surface level patches. And in many cases, they ended up facing another lawsuit because the issue was never addressed at its core. This shows that quick fixes don't hold, they eventually break. And when they do, they create even worse customer experience. Let me give you a simple example. Imagine you're content is being read in a wrong order by a screen reader. The last paragraph is read first, followed by the first, and the organization applies a quick fix, corrects the tab order without doing in-depth testing of the form. To them, it sounds all right, but the links on the page, they're still not read correctly by a screen reader. The form technically works, but experience is still broken. What does this lead to? Two things. It results in a poor experience, poor user experience, confusion, frustration, and abandonment, and maybe another lawsuit. Second, it leads to loss of trust in the organization. And that loss of trust manifests itself in a number of forms, in increased complaints, higher support tickets, and ultimately impact on your pipeline. So the message here is simple. Act now, not with panic, but with a plan. Because accessibility needs to be addressed strategically, not reactively. So if quick fixes don't hold, and we've just seen exactly why, the next question is, what does it actually mean to do accessibility right? This is where VUCAC comes in. And I want to be clear that it isn't meant to be a checklist you panic through before a deadline. It's a framework that helps you fix accessibility at the core, not at the surface. VUCAC is built around four key principles: perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. Perceivable means that information and user interface components must be presented in ways user can actually perceive. In simple terms, the content cannot be invisible to someone's senses. If a user can't see it, hear it, or otherwise perceive it, then from their perspective, it doesn't exist, no matter how technically correct the form is. Operable. Operable means users must be able to operate the interface. The experience cannot depend on interactions that user cannot perform. If someone can't use a mouse, needs more time, or relies on assistive technology, the form still needs to work fully, not partially. Understandable means that both the information and the way the interface behaves must make sense and is not confusing. Users should understand what is being asked of them and how to move forward. And finally, robust means the content must be reliable across a variety of user agents, including assistive technologies, because accessibility cannot be fragile. It needs to keep working as browsers, screen readers, and our platforms evolve, not break with the next update. When organizations address all these four principles together, accessibility stops being a series of patches, it becomes durable. And that's the difference between reacting to issues and building experiences that actually last. Now, let's talk about how accessibility is actually measured, because this is where a lot of confusion comes in. WCAG gives us something really important: clear, testable success criteria. This isn't subjective. Each requirement can be evaluated. It either passes or it fails. And that's what makes accessibility measurable, consistent, and enforceable. When we talk about conformance, we are really talking about how many of those criteria you meet and at what level. At the base level, level A covers the most fundamental accessibility needs. Then we have level AA, which builds on level A and addresses the most common real world barriers. This is where most legal and regulatory expectations sit today. And then level AAA. This is the highest and most stringent level. It builds on A and AA, but it's not always realistic to achieve everywhere. The key thing I want to stress here is this. Accessibility isn't about aiming for the highest level on the day one. It's about understanding where you are today, what level you are expected to meet, and making intentional progress towards that without relying on fragile patches. This is what moves accessibility from being a guessing game to something organizations can plan for, track, and sustain. Now that we have talked about standards and conformance, let's bring this down to reality. What actually goes wrong in forms? These are some of the most common form issues we see across form industries, across platforms, and over again. A very common issue is missing labels and instructions. This usually happens when form fields rely on placeholder text instead of proper labels. Visually, it might look fine, but for screen readers or for the users who are using screen readers, the field has no clear purpose, which makes the form confusing or unusable. We also see poor color contrast across many forms. And when text and background colors don't meet the contrast requirements, users with low vision or color blindness struggle to read the content. And this isn't just an accessibility issue, it directly affects readability for everyone, especially on mobile or in low light conditions. We also see a lot of problems around inaccessible error messages. Errors aren't announced properly to screen readers, or users aren't told clearly what went wrong and how to fix it. I would say this is one of the biggest reasons forms get abandoned. Users hit an error and don't know how to recover. Then there are keyboard navigation issues. Many forms still assume that users are using a mouse. But if a form can't be completed using just a keyboard, or if the tab order jumps around unpredictably, users get stuck very quickly. And when that happens, the form is effectively unusable for them. Another issue that comes up a lot is lack of screen reader compatibility. This usually comes down to missing semantic structure or missing ARIA attributes. And it gets worse when content updates dynamically. Things change on the screen, but screen reader is never informed. So, from the user's perspective, form feels broken, even though it's technically working. And finally, time limits without alternatives. Forms that expire quickly, without warning, without extensions, create real barriers. Users who need more time to read, understand, or navigate simply don't get a fair chance to complete the process. What's important to notice here is that none of these issues are obvious if you're testing the form visually or with a mouse at full speed. These problems only surface when you think about how different people actually interact with your forms. And that's exactly why we are going to look at some real examples next. So you can see what these issues look like in practice and how they can be fixed correctly. So let's look at some real world examples. Let's talk about the screenshot. While browsing some US agency websites, I came across one from a public agency. They have a table, as you can see, and table headers use gray text on a dark green background. This color combination makes the text, hard to read. You may have to zoom in or squint to see the details clearly, which is not ideal for accessibility. Next, I'll show you some slides with examples of good contrast versus bad contrast. You will see how just tweaking a few colors can make everything much easier to read. As per WCAG 2.2 level AA conformance, a normal size font, which is less than 18 point, must maintain a contrast of 4.1 is to 1. Sorry, 4.5 is to 1. And the text larger than 18 point must meet a contrast ratio of 3 is to 1. So here on the slide, you will see what a good, bad contrast looks like in both scenarios. This is to showcase what a bare minimum good looks like, which is still not perfect, but it is within the standards. But next thing I want to show you is how you can actually fix the contrast issue. Now this is a game changer. This is using the same background color, the only change is the font color, and see how big impact it has made. This shows when contrast is done right, content becomes clearer, forms are easier to complete, and users are far less likely to abandon the process. Now let's talk about errors and how errors go wrong in forms. This maps directly to WCAG requirement around error identification and input assistance, that users are clearly told when something goes wrong, what went wrong, and how to recover. In this example, you can see an error message that simply says incorrect input, and that's it. There's no highlight on the field that caused the error. There's no explanation of what went wrong, and there's no guidance on how to fix it. For a sighted user, this is already frustrating. They're left guessing which field, what went wrong. Now imagine that for a screen reader user. It's even worse. The error may be announced, but there is no context tying it back to the actual field that needs attention. So what happens next? User starts hunting, they tab through fields, re-enter data, try again, or they just give up entirely. And this is why error context matters so much. When an error occurs, users need three things immediately: what went wrong, where it went wrong, and what they need to do next. When that context is missing, the form technically works, but the experience breaks, leading to a frustrated user and an entirely avoidable support ticket. In the next slide, I'll show you what a good error handling looks like, where the error is clear, connected to the right field, and actually helps the user to move forward. Now, in this scenario, when an error occurs, the user isn't left guessing. The error is clearly tied to the exact field that caused the problem. In this case, it's an email field. The message doesn't just say something is wrong. It explains what the issue is and how to fix it. And this user has entered incorrect email and error says, please enter a valid email address, example name @somewhere.com. Now, thanks to the complete error message, user immediately knows where to focus, what went wrong, and what to do next. And just as importantly, with the help of screen reader, this information is also conveyed in speech which means screen reader users receive the same context as sighted users. This is what proper error handling does. It doesn't block users, it guides them forward. And that's the difference between a form that technically works and a form that actually supports the person trying to complete it. Moving on to the next issue, visible focus indicator. This one maps directly to a requirement around keyboard accessibility, specifically the expectation that focus must always be visible. On the right, you will see a short clip of someone navigating this form using only a keyboard. Watch what happens as they tab through fields. The focus jumps unpredictably with an incorrect flow. There is either no visible focus indicator or it's so subtle that it might as well not be there. For someone using a keyboard, this is incredibly disorientating. If you don't know where your focus is, you don't know what you're about to interact with, and that makes the form very hard to complete. This is especially problematic when tab order doesn't follow the visual layout. The user expects to move logically from one field to the next, but instead, focus jumps around the page in a way that doesn't make sense. And this one is of those issues that often goes unnoticed during visual testing with a mouse. Everything looks fine until you try to use the keyboard. Therefore, a clear, visible focus indicator is essential. It tells user where they are, what they are interacting with, and what's coming next. When the focus isn't visible or navigation order is broken, the form technically exists, but experience becomes frustrating, confusing, and in many cases, unusable. In the next example, we'll look at what proper focus handling looks like and how small change can make a big difference. Now, compare the previous visual with what you are seeing here. As the user tabs through the form, focus moves logically and predictably, following the visual order of page. And just as importantly, the focused element is clearly highlighted at every step. The user always knows where they are. They know which field they are in, what they're about to interact with next. And this might seem like a small detail, but for keyboard users, this is everything. A visible focus indicator and a proper tab order is what replaces the mouse cursor. It's how users orient themselves and move confidently through the form. And this is a great example of how accessibility improvements don't just meet a requirement, they improve the experience for everyone. So now that we have looked at some of the common issues and real examples, I want to share a success story that shows what realistic progress actually looks like. We are working with a leading global bank that is working towards WCAG 2.1 level AA compliance and facing a significant challenge. A backlog of more than 1,000 complex legislation heavy PDF forms, all requiring full accessibility compliance. Many of these forms had been in use for years, and when we assessed them, we found familiar issues: missing tags, incorrect reading order, poor screen reader output. The forms technically existed, but they were not truly usable for everyone. What made this successful was the approach. Instead of trying to fix everything at once, 4 Point established an ongoing partnership focused on fixing, maintaining, and recertifying forms as forms evolve. Remediation was done in batches, aligned to priority and usage. High value, frequently used forms, the ones with the greatest impact on users and highest risk to the organization, were addressed first. Over time, accessibility stopped being a one-time effort and became part of an ongoing process. And as forms change today, accessibility is maintained continuously through a trusted long-term relationship. And that's the key takeaway here. Accessibility at scale isn't about fixing everything overnight. It's about prioritizing, prioritization, consistency, and building a sustainable approach that holds up every time, even in complex regulated environments. So now that we have seen the issues, walked through the real example, and looked at what realistic progress can actually look like, this is usually where organizations land after that. Most organizations know there are accessibility issues. They are usually aware of them. They are often willing to invest time and effort to fix them. But where things break down is here. They don't know where to start. There's uncertainty around scope, questions about priority, concerns about cost, risk, disruption, and very quickly, accessibility starts to feel overwhelming instead of achievable. So, this next section is meant to deal with exactly that. You don't need to fix everything at once, and you don't need a perfect roadmap. What you need is a clear, practical starting point, one that helps you move forward with confidence without panic. So, in the next few slides, I'll walk through a set of steps that organizations can realistically follow, steps that turn awareness into action and make accessibility manageable and sustainable. Before I go into the first step, I want to call something out. I've deliberately broken this journey into 7 clear steps, not because accessibility needs to be complicated, but because without structure, teams tend to get stuck. And these steps are meant to give you clarity, momentum, and a place to start without feeling overwhelmed. So look into the first step towards accessibility, which is identifying scope and ownership. This is where accessibility either becomes manageable or starts to drift. The first question is, what's actually in scope? That usually includes online forms, public-facing portals, and any PDFs or documents tied to those forms. If users have to interact with it to get something done, it belongs in this category. It belongs in scope. The next piece is understanding what compliance your organization is accountable for. Which regulations apply to you? Which standards do you fall under? Whether that's WCAG 2.1, 2.2, Section 508, ADA, AODA, or any other requirement. This needs to be clear upfront. After that comes ownership. Accessibility cannot live in a gray area. You need clear ownership across the business to identify whoever is responsible for accessibility or compliance. Ask yourself, who owns the form? Is it owned by one department? Or is it that each department owns their own forms? And finally, everyone needs to agree on what success looks like so that teams aren't working towards different interpretations. Getting clarity at this stage will save time later. It reduces rework, avoids confusion, and gives teams a solid foundation before any fixes even begin. So, with scope and ownership in place, the next step is to inventory your forms, because this is where prioritization really begins. What usually surfaces at this stage is a visibility gap. Organizations often don't have a clear sense of how many forms actually exist or where they live. Therefore, goal of inventorying your forms is simple. It is visibility. Most organizations also struggle because they don't have a clear picture of what actually exists. You need visibility into the forms people really use, public facing forms, internal or employee facing forms, legacy forms, embedded forms, and the role each one plays in delivering the services. At this stage, you are capturing just enough information to understand what the form is used for, how many users rely on it, and what systems it connects to. Very important. Without an inventory, everything feels urgent. With an inventory, you can start making intentional decisions about what matters most and what comes next. And once you have that visibility, accessibility stops feeling overwhelming because you are no longer guessing. You are now prioritizing. Now that we've identified ownership and with an inventory in place, you can finally move from visibility to prioritization. This is where accessibility starts becoming intentional because we are thinking, let's prioritize what to fix first. Once you know what forms exist, the goal isn't to fix everything at once. No, it's to focus on the forms that matters the most. That usually means starting with the high impact services, things like benefits, permits, payments, where people depend on these forms to move forward. You also want to look at high traffic forms or forms with high abandonment. If a lot of users are touching a form and dropping off, this could be a clear indicator of accessibility gap. Then there's legal and compliance risk. Some forms simply carry more exposure than others, and those need attention sooner rather than later. And finally, pay close attention to forms with known accessibility complaints. If users are already telling you that something isn't working, that's a strong signal on where to start. Therefore, prioritization is what keeps accessibility from feeling overwhelming. It helps teams make quicker progress, remove big risks, and improve experiences step by step instead of all at once. Once priorities are set, the next step is to document accessibility gaps so that fixes can be scoped out based on facts, not guesswork. This is where things really start to become clear. At this stage, the goal isn't to fix everything yet. It's to clearly understand where your forms fall short against your regulatory requirements. That usually means looking at areas like labels, instructions, keyboard navigation, error handling, validation, color contrast, and all the same areas we just walked through in the examples. And this is typically the point where an organization should conduct a formal accessibility audit. And how you may approach this step matters. Yes, automated tools are useful, they are fast, they surface obvious issues, but they don't tell the whole story. That's why manual testing and assistive technology checks are critical. They uncover the real barriers users experience, the issues that might technically pass a scan but still break the journey. The outcome of this step is simple: a clear, documented view of what's broken and why. And that clarity is what allows the next step, remediation, to be focused, efficient, and effective rather than reactive. Once accessibility gaps are clearly documented, the next step is remediation, not all at once, step by step, in phases. This is where many organizations either make real progress or fall back into quick fix scenario. The key here is to start with the high value fixes, things like proper labels, instructions, and as these changes have an immediate impact on usability and accessibility, and also they address the most common barriers user face in forms. At the same time, remediation isn't just about surface issues. You also need to address what's happening underneath, the code level problems, design inconsistencies, and content that is not clear or predictable. And this is important. Remediation should never be done all at once. You must implement in phases. A phased approach reduces risk, keeps team aligned, and makes accountability sustainable and accessibility sustainable. So once remediation is underway and the major accessibility gaps are being addressed, this is where the focus naturally shifts. At this point, the form may technically meet requirements, but accessibility doesn't stop at compliance. The next question becomes, how long does this act like how actually this feels for a person who's using it? Because fixing issues is important, but creating an experience that's clear, usable, and confident is what truly removes barriers. That brings us to the next step, improving user experience. At this stage, question isn't about can someone complete this form? It's can they complete it easily without unnecessary effort? One of the most effective ways to do this is by offering multiple ways to interact with the form. Some users prefer typing, others benefit from guided assistance, and for many, voice-based input can remove friction entirely. The goal is not to force everyone into one experience. It's to let users choose the interaction that works best for them. Imagine that application that you are putting on hold for weeks and is now, fillable using speech. That could be a game changer. This step is also about reducing cognitive load, using clear, simple language, guiding users step by step instead of overwhelming them all at once, and removing unnecessary fields whenever possible. When you reduce cognitive effort, users make fewer mistakes, they hesitate less, and they are far more likely to complete the form successfully the first time. This is where accessibility and experience truly come together, not just meeting requirements, but creating forms that actually help people move forward. Now, once accessibility is built into the experience, the final step is to make sure that it lasts because accessibility isn't something you fix once and just move on. It needs to hold up as forms change, teams evolve, and regulations continue to shift. That brings us to the last step, making accessibility sustainable. The final step is about making sure that the progress you've made so far doesn't disappear over time. Accessibility can't live as one-off effort or a remediation phase. It needs to be embedded into how work actually gets done. That means building accessibility into new form creation, into vendor selection, into QA, into testing workflows, so that issues are caught early, not after something goes live. And it also means training teams, not to turn everyone into an accessibility expert, but to give them a shared foundation. And finally, this step is about monitoring and iterating over time. Forms change, content evolves, regulations shift. So, accessibility needs to keep pace with these changes because it's a program. Accessibility is a program, not a one time project. When it's treated that way, organizations don't just stay compliant, they build experiences that remain usable, inclusive, and trusted over the long term. We have now covered what it takes to make forms accessible and, just as importantly, how to keep them that way. Now let's talk about what can help reinforce and accelerate that journey and where AI fits into that picture. AI isn't here to replace accessibility fundamentals. It's here to strengthen them, and especially at the point where users interact with the form. One of the biggest ways AI helps is by improving data capture. It reduces barriers by guiding users as they complete forms instead of waiting until something goes wrong after submission. AI can also provide smart guidance and better error handling, helping users avoid mistakes in first place rather than correcting them later. That alone can significantly reduce frustration, rework, and form abandonment. What's important is that this doesn't require ripping out existing system. AI can integrate with what organizations already have today without disrupting your existing workflows or downstream processes. It also allows users to interact with forms in the way that works best for them, whether that's typing, voice, or guided assistance, instead of forcing everyone into a single experience. And when applied thoughtfully, AI can make compliance easier while at the same time improving usability for everyone. So, in this journey, AI is not the starting point, it's an accelerator. It helps organizations move faster and deliver better experiences once the right accessibility foundations are in place. And when we talk about AI in this journey, one very practical way it shows up is through voice forms. Voice forms are AI powered assistant designed to make form filling more accessible, inclusive, and less frustrating. Instead of forcing everyone to interact with the form in the same way, voice forms allows user to complete form in the way that works best for them. Some users may prefer to type, others may benefit from voice-based interaction, particularly users with mobility or vision challenges. And for many, having clear guided prompts makes the difference between guessing and completing the form confidently. What's important here is that voice forms don't change the underlying process. They integrate with existing systems and your current approved forms, which means organizations can improve accessibility and usability without disrupting workflows or rebuilding everything from scratch. The result is better experience for your users, fewer errors, less frustration, and higher completion rates. While organizations benefit from cleaner data, reduced abandonment. So, voice forms aren't about replacing forms that you have in your system right now. They're about improving how people interact with them, making accessibility easier to achieve and easier to sustain. So, if you're thinking, this all makes sense, but where do we actually begin? This is the simplest way to start. We offer a 1.5 hour custom working session where we focus specifically on your organization. We look at your current state, what forms you have today, how they are being used, where accessibility challenges are likely showing up. We align on the accessibility standards that apply to you, and we walk away with clear, high level next step recommendations, like what to focus on first, what can wait, and how to move forward without feeling overwhelmed. This isn't about jumping straight into remediation. It's about getting clarity, reducing uncertainty, and setting a realistic path forward. And if you would like to learn more or explore whether this makes sense for your organization, you can visit our website, www.4point.com, and contact us. With that, thank you for your time today, and I'm happy to take questions. I see 3 questions. How do you ensure accessibility standards are applied consistently across new and existing forms? So, what I'll say is that it starts with the tools that you're using. It's critical to use a form authoring platform that gives you that empowers you through in the journey of accessibility by, using standardized templates, style sheets, or reusable components, which are called fragments. So when accessibility compliant templates and style sheets are created upfront based on findings from your gap analysis, every form that is built using those standards inherits the accessibility by default. So this removes guesswork from authors and ensures that accessibility is built when the form is developed. And then reusable form fragments play an equally important role. Many form elements such as address blocks, contact details, or consent sections are repeated across multiple forms in many cases. So by creating these fragments and making them accessible, you will have to apply change in future if there are any in one place, and it will propagate to every form from there on. And this is something that you can take advantage when you're using AEM Designer or AEM Adaptive Forms. You can use the templates, the style sheets, and fragments in that case. And then, which is second part, this is very important, doing periodic audits. And I'm tying it back to one of the steps I discussed. A complete and accurate inventory of forms is very essential so that nothing is overlooked, because there's something that goes, there's something that legacy form that is sitting out of sight. So make sure that you're doing regular audits to identify such forms and gaps, and so that you can plan a remediation for them. So together with, proper tools and proper and periodic audits, you can make sure that your new forms and your existing forms, you can also apply the style sheet and those templates to your existing forms. So that way you can give a standardized accessible experience to all your users. Next is, how does AI help accelerate accessibility for existing forms without requiring organizations to redesign or migrate their current forms? Well, you can use voice form today to work seamlessly with your existing approved forms and backend processes that support them. So Darian, which is 4 points voice form, is a context-aware AI agent. It uses your existing form structure, business rule, validation to guide the user through completion using typing or natural speech. And you can modernize the data capture experience without disrupting their current system. So you can do this today. Sorry, I'm moving on to the next question because we have reached the top of the hour. The regulations that affect me aren't clear. What level of vocab should I use as a guide? So the rules vary based on where you are, based on geography. So what I recommend is that, first of all, you must try and find what governance applies to you, but there is a reliable way to get started. If you don't know, you can start with vocab level AA. And I recommend that you aim for level 2.2, but try and meet level 2.1 at least across all the forms and across all the web content that's eligible under this rule. Okay, with that, thank you so much. I appreciate your time. And if you have any questions, please let us know. Thank you.